Hey everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. And I think I've explained this before, but I call it Making It Up. Not only do we make up a short story at the end, but I don't really prepare for these things. I get pitched an author, or I know of an author that I want to talk to, and I kind of reach out to them, or they reach out to me. And I put it all on my calendar, everything gets booked. And then the day before, I'm like, who am I talking to tomorrow? Oh yeah, that's right. And making sure I do some research on them. But I kind of treat it as like, hey, I'm running into this person. I'm meeting this person at a cocktail party. And, I find out that they're a writer, and I kind of pull them aside. I'm like, let's just talk. And I'm very curious to know like how they became who they became, what their publication journey was like. But I like going in it without, a lot of expectations. I don't really know a lot about this person necessarily, aside from maybe some of their works that I might have read. So I was very delighted today to meet and have a very meaningful, deep conversation with Veronica Henry. So she's the author of Bacchanal, The Quarter Storm, and The Foreign Exchange, which is in the Mambo Reina series. Her work has debuted at #1 on multiple Amazon bestsellers charts, was chosen as an editor's pick for Best African American Fantasy, and shortlisted for the Manly Wade Wellman Award. So, Veronica's a very interesting person. So Veronica, she was encouraged very early on, almost made early on, although she didn't have a problem with it, to read. Her father, insisted on family reading time, which is wonderful. So she's always been engrossed by books, but went in terms of her studies kind of towards technology. So, kind of like me, she just decided to start writing, and in her case, she got lots of encouragement, if not even pressure from her husband, who said, you should write this. You should write. You're good at this kind of thing. You should really write a book. But so it was just interesting hearing her journey, which was similar to mine in terms of like your first 3 books, nothing ever happens with them. They're your practice novels. And then you start to find your voice, and you start to understand structure, and you start to get better at dialogue and all that kind of stuff. And then you write something that resonates first with an agent, and then with a publisher. And then hopefully it just keeps going on from there. But we talked a lot about her journey, talked a lot about how you balance work life, because we both still do that as well. And, just the expectations of readers as well. So I was thoroughly engaged. We had a really good short story at the end that got potentially a little gruesome. Who knows where it would have gone, but it was really fun. So her newest book out is The Foreign Exchange. So I hope you check that out. This is my conversation with Veronica Henry.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you. Hi, Veronica. Nice to meet you.
I'm going to change my name because that is not.
You're not Sir Deal?
I am not. The perils of sharing an office and a computer.
Yes. You never know what you're going to get.
You do not.
How are you today?
I'm actually doing really well today. What about you?
I'm doing well. We're getting some cold, snowy weather here. I'm in Colorado. But it's okay. But I have a puppy. And so that's, as much as I like cold, snowy weather, I didn't foresee how much of a nightmare a winter with a new puppy was going to be in Colorado, taking this thing out all the time when it's 10 degrees and wet and muddy and snowy.
Yeah, that's the stuff they don't tell you. And that's all the pictures and all the cool stuff, how cute they are. Yeah. Snow, right. Rain. And still got to go out.
And I'm perpetuating that problem because those are all the pictures I put on Facebook and Instagram are all the good ones. and people out there are like, oh, maybe I should get a puppy.
You got to perpetuate the myth. Got to keep it going.
That's right. So you're in North Carolina?
I'm in South Carolina.
South Carolina. Oh, I was just there.
Ah.
because my son is a senior in high school, and we're looking at colleges, and we looked at South Carolina, University of South Carolina, and Georgia on that trip.
Okay.
So right now, South Carolina is his number one. We're still waiting to hear on a few. So,
Mm-hmm.
how long have you been there for?
About 3 months.
Oh, not long.
Yeah. Yeah, just got here. Yeah.
Where were
But I
you?
was in North Carolina previously.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
What precipitated the move?
Family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's usually either family or job. For me, it was family.
And is your family? Did you grow up in the South?
No, actually, I grew up between Brooklyn, New York, and Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, two very different places from the South.
Two very different places. I mean, and my trails have taken me all across the country and back. So who knows? I don't know if this is my forever home or not. It is my right now home.
With all of your moving and travels throughout the country over the years, do you have a place that you kind of gravitate to, or just kind of feel like it sounds like maybe this might be it, but is there a place like, man, I'd really like to get back to Brooklyn and spend more time there?
There's two places, probably Brooklyn and Las Vegas. Those are my two favorite places.
Wow. Why what's your pull towards Vegas?
I was there for about 12 years combined. In fact, I liked it so much I left and came back. But it's I don't know, the desert and I kind of just vibed.
Yeah. That you don't mind you'd rather have 115 than -4.
Yes, given the choice, I would take that. And luckily in Vegas, that was the case for a few months out of the year. The rest of it was smooth sailing.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're growing up in between Brooklyn and Cleveland, and do you have siblings or?
Yep, siblings are. I still have a sibling in New York, and then the rest of them are actually here in South Carolina and in Tennessee.
Okay. And what was kind of the I'm always curious about roots of creativity, and I talk to a lot of people, and you can really chart it fairly nicely back to
Mhm.
7 years old is kind of where I hear a lot of people. And so I'm always curious to know, like, as you're growing up, did you have creativity around you? Did you
Um,
find solace in books? Or did you kind of think about that? Like, oh, this is where I really started thinking about maybe I wanted to do some kind of storytelling with my life.
the interesting thing is that books, definitely, libraries, definitely. That's where I spent my time as a youth. Either if it was the neighborhood library or if it was the school library, that was my happy place. That's where I wanted to be. I was that goofy kid that created her own library that nobody ever came and checked a book out of, but that's okay. I still have my library. But the interesting thing is, I had absolutely no idea that I wanted to have a creative career.
Right. Right.
That didn't come until much, much later. But as for me, it was just the love of reading that I think kind of paved the way, though.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because I feel like if a person is creative by nature,
Mhm.
that's going to come out at some point. It almost can't not come out in a way. And it's always fascinating to see how that does manifest itself. Because when you're young, you're like thinking about TV shows. It's like, I like watching TV shows as a kid, but that doesn't mean I know how to write them or how to create them or even want to do that kind of thing. I just enjoy the story. But eventually, if you have it in you, you're going to start to ask those questions like, well, how do you do this? And how hard is it to do it and take that step? Do you remember like why you even started getting interested in books? Were you kind of, were your parents like, this is a house that reads, so you're going to
Yeah,
be a reader?
it was definitely the house that reads.
Yeah.
So there were books all throughout the house, and books that were probably well beyond my age range that I still picked up anyway.
Right.
Um,
Which is great. I think that's how you push yourself.
yeah, definitely. So it was just kind of always all around. And so it was one of those things where it was just not even a question. And it was one of those things. I had the father that's like, you will have dedicated reading time.
Oh,
Luckily for
good.
me, though, it wasn't a struggle. It was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was one of those things. It was a parental directive that I didn't actually mind.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Do you remember having any particular affinity for types of stories, or just anything?
Um, Initially, I would say it was just anything and everything.
Mm.
But eventually, I started leaning two ways. And oddly enough, it manifests much later, but two things. Sci-fi and fantasy
Mhm.
definitely started becoming really prevalent in my life. When I discovered, Isaac Asimov and those types of people went, flew through Foundation, all of that golden era, what they call the golden era. Although I may not call it that right now, but just during the writers during that time, Ray Bradbury, these are people that I started reading and really started gravitating towards sci-fi and fantasy.
Mhm.
And the other half of that was mystery. So Hardy Boys,
Mhm.
and then Nancy Drew mysteries. These are things that I just started leaning towards later on.
Yeah.
But even then, and still now, I really read across the board, and just it's got to be a good book, fiction or nonfiction, and I'm in.
So are you still a voracious reader? Because I feel like my reading has not kept up from what it was.
Yeah, you know what? You're a writer as well, so you know how it goes. The thing that I love most, the thing that I get to do now, is the thing that I have to give up. It's really hard, but I don't get enough time to read like I used to, and that's one of the things that I miss the most. I'm lucky if I can get in a few minutes before bed, but
That's
um,
totally me.
yeah, not the person that used to curl up with a book for a couple hours every night and read. That's gone.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it will return.
But it's, you know, and it's easy for me to say I'm too busy to read, but the truth is I will sit on my couch at night and watch TV,
Mhm.
and then I get into bed and that's when I read and I'm like, I'm tired. So there's something there that like
Mhm.
and it depends on the book. If I'm reading a book that's just hooking me, then
Mhm.
I will take more time with it. But I think it's almost like there's something about being a writer and reading that it doesn't ruin it by any means, but you think about reading differently,
You
right?
do. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the other problem that I have with reading is that it's hard to read just for fun anymore.
Right.
I can't do that. That the writer brain starts kicking in and I start trying to analyze, oh, how did this writer do this thing? And then I'm like, oh, well, no, that didn't work. And why did they choose that? So the analytical part of me starts kicking in and tries to ruin the whole experience.
Yeah,
Um, but
totally.
every once in a while, I don't know about you, but every once in a while I get one of those books where it's so good that writer brain just can't even contend with it.
Right, right. It suspends all that. I mean, how it works for me is I gravitate towards nonfiction. I mean, just because I like good nonfiction stories,
Yeah,
especially like like good stories of like corporate fraud. I don't know why I think that's fascinating, but it's also you can't. It's not fiction, so your brain isn't critiquing it, saying like, "Oh, I would have done it differently." It's like, no, it's
right.
nonfiction. So did you go to school and think I want to major in English, creative writing, or what was your path?
No, my father was not having any of that. So
He encouraged reading, but he's like, don't be so foolish as to become a writer.
no, no. Actually, the interesting thing is he did encourage us all to pursue, careers that would, let's say, pay us. I guess pay us well. So
Mhm.
I did end up pursuing a career in technology. That's what I went to school for, and that's what I do now. But it's one of those things also in that it wasn't a struggle for me, just like with reading. Probably somewhere in the seventh or eighth grade, my math teacher, who I loved at the time, Mr. Mueller, he got a Radio Shack TRS 80 computer and he
The
brought it in.
Trash 80. Of course, I had one of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. So he brought that in. And instead of going to play outside like all of the normal kids, a few of us gathered around with him at lunchtime and we started learning to code in BASIC.
Yep.
So that was that for me. I knew exactly what I wanted to do very early on.
That's so interesting because I had the exact same path. Like I didn't end up studying technology, but I remember coding on a
Mm-hmm.
TRS-80 in my
Oh,
room when I was however old I was probably 10,
mm-hmm.
and I was obsessed with it. And I would spend hours making the little dot go from the left screen to the
Oh, yeah.
right screen. But yeah, it's so interesting. So that's what you studied, and then after school, you just went into the technology field.
Yep, that's exactly what I did. And that's all I've ever done. I've done everything from network admin, programming stuff, program management, project management, all across the board.
And when people who like colleagues perhaps who find out that you're a writer, I would imagine you get a little bit of disbelief, like, well, no, but you're a left brain person, you can't
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah,
also
I
be a writer.
definitely get that. It's sort of a conundrum that people can't necessarily wrap their heads around. There have been a couple other ones that I know. I know Stephen Bruce, back in the day, I think was a programmer. A couple other people I think that are in the technical space that also write, but it definitely is more of an anomaly.
Yeah.
But it's also good because I know some people that have jobs where they write during the day and then they also write fiction, like they might be an editor or they might write articles for a magazine and that sort of thing. And I can't imagine how they're able to do both.
Right.
It just seems like I would run out of words, by
Right.
the end of the
Right.
day.
Or technical writers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but so my day job also is very heavy into data. I'm more in the management side, but
Mhm.
it's analytics. And I think probably like with your job, at the end of the day, between that and writing, it is all kind of about problem solving. You're trying to
Yes.
figure out this story, or you're trying to figure out this technological issue. And there's creativity, to be had in both of those venues. And I think a lot of people can't quite see that, but when you really look at it, that's what it is. It's just you're just creatively solving problems all day long.
Exactly. You're just using different parts of your brain. And,
Right.
and I think it works for me, in that I can use the technical side during the day. And like you, moved more in the management, and, aspects of the job, but still it's also in data. So it's using a totally different part of my brain than I use for creative writing. But it's still problem solving because that's when I sit down at the end of the day or first thing in the morning when I'm writing. The first thing I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this thing? How am I going to convey this message, this emotion, this setting? And so it's still figuring things out. It's still being analytical, right? In a
Right.
way. So it's kind of exercising the same tools, but using different parts of your brain.
And I think it's an outlet for a creative side that I think pretty much everybody has, and
Yeah.
people I think exercise that in different ways. But for me, I'm not writing all day, so when I do sit down, I write around 5 p.m. I've been looking forward to it all day because I sit down and I can literally feel my psychic change. You're just
Yeah.
like, I say, sit down and I feel this stress just released from me,
Mhm.
and your brain just kind of shifts and you're like, okay, what world was I in, what's happening? And then it just sucks you right. It's so weird. And
It is.
I might write for an hour and that's it, and then I get out of it immediately, but it's this escape. I don't know if you feel that same way.
I actually feel the same. I was going to ask you that. So you're like an evening writer, and I write most of the time, unless I'm on deadline, which I am now. I
Right.
typically am a morning writer, so I love to get up and make it the first part of my day because that's when I'm sharpest. And usually my brain is mush by the end of the day, even though I still crawl back into my office and write typically after dinner, again during deadline time. But you operate better if you write in the evening after work.
It's funny. I've been writing for about 20 years now, and it's changed over time. And just
Uh,
because, so right now I write from 5 to 6, 7 days a
okay.
week. And that's
Mhm.
kind of like, this is my sacrosanct time. Nobody bother me kind of a thing. But I've
Mhm.
written in the mornings, I've written in the afternoons, not really so much late at night, because I'm kind of dead by then. But it is funny how it's shifted over time, but it's very ritualistic for me. Like, I
Yeah.
pour the same cocktail, I sit in the same chair, slip on the headphones, listen to thunderstorm sounds, and have the lights exactly the way. So it is very much a ritual for me. And if I'm writing a first draft, I'm just kind of targeting 500 words a day.
Yeah.
And I do that, and you can have it you think you can have a book done in 4 months. It takes longer than that because of everything else going on. But you can, if you do it 7 days a week, you can get it done. My problem is I don't outline. So sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what happens next. So you just sit there for an hour like an idiot.
Oh my gosh, I can't do that. That's the way that I wrote my first couple books that no one will ever see. But after that, after I got on, and then like my very first novel was released, Bacchanal, I was able to work on that book, 7, years. This was before I had an agent, before I had any contract or whatever.
Sure.
So, I had a first version of that book, and then, I was able to set it aside and let it marinate a little bit and then go back to it and work on it, more. But after I got a book deal and after I got, the agent and all of that, and someone said, yeah, here's some money, but you got to get me this book by this date. Well, then I started having to outline from then on, because I just felt like, I just didn't have that time to wander, which I really prefer, but I didn't have the time to wander like I wanted. So I needed to at least have a roadmap that tells me how I'm going to get from A to Z. But the interesting thing about the outline for me is that I rarely stick to it anyway, but somehow having it done gives me that comfort that I know where I'm going and that I can get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was going to be my question too, because I think, plotters versus pantsers, a pretty even split, right? And I think it's a natural, I think it's just, this is who you are. I don't, I think you can probably learn to do it either way, but I think you have a natural tendency, like you're right-handed or left-handed. And, so whenever I've tried to outline, within 3 pages of actually writing the draft, I'm like, oh no, that doesn't happen. This happens. So you just kind of alluded to that. You tend to veer off. So do you see your outlines as being kind of just a very basic, this is, the publisher will at least have a sense of the story, but then you sit down and you're like, oh, here are all the nuances that I hadn't thought about? Or do you actually take full right turns and it becomes nothing like what you had outlined for the publisher?
I think it is definitely in some aspects an exercise for the publisher, right? So they feel comfortable that I'm going to actually get this thing done. And I will say that I stick to most of the basic elements of the story. Some of the circumstances, of course, names and things like that may change. But what I've got to have in my head is the time frame, right? When am I telling this story? That has to remain constant for me and be kind of very firmly fixed in my mind. And even the where. Some of the things about, setting characters, those types of things can change a little bit. Even who I think they are at the outset, of course, can change throughout the book. So I will say, if I could put a number to it, and I have to because we're data people, right?
Right.
If I could put a number to it, I might say maybe 50% of my outline actually ends up being in the novel.
Okay, that's good enough probably for the publisher. So, but exactly. I want to go back. So, what was that inflection point in your life where you're like, I am actually going to sit down knowing nothing about how to write a book. I'm going to write a book. That
point was my husband. So I'm eternally grateful to him for giving me this most awesome gift. It's just the most rewarding thing I've ever done. But I was that reader. So I was always had my head in a book, always reading. And then I was always very good at editing, fiction, things for nonfiction for people and stuff like that. So I'd have a friend that says, oh, I need help. I'm writing this paper for this, that, or the other. Can you take a look at it? I was that person. So he kind of looked and he said, well, why don't you? He's like, you're good at editing and you love to read. Why don't you write a book? And of course, I'm like, no way. Can't do that. Too many words. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So long story short, over a period of, I don't know how long, he kept bugging me about it. And one day we were in Barnes & Noble, and this was in, I think that was in Arlington, Texas. And we were in Barnes & Noble, and I saw a book, and that book said How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy. That was the title of the book. I can't even remember who the author was at this point. So I picked that book up. I read that book cover to cover. And at the end, they said, now put down the book and go and write a novel. And that's what I did.
Wow. And did you already have an idea in mind, or You just
It
had
kind
the
of,
desire before you had the idea.
I had the desire long before I had the idea, and I'm one of those people whose ideas don't come hot and heavy. It's one of those things where I might get one, and it's a really good one, and I love it, and I got to run with it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm the same
So
way.
I think I knew that I wanted to write, and then the idea for the story kind of came out of that, and then I just sat down. I was a pantser totally at that point, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of just sat down. I was all into open source at that point. So I had a Linux computer. I was using Open Office
Hmm.
and fired that up and kind of just wrote, every day, like you just kind of put some words down on the page. Had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand dialogue tags halfway. I don't know, but I got it done. And that taught me something. And I'm
Yeah.
like, if I could sit down here and write what at the time was a 90,000 word book, I'm like, I'm on to something. So this may be complete trash, but I'm gonna try again.
Yeah, and you almost wish somebody, because my first three books didn't sell, and
Mm.
I got into writing in my early 30s with like just totally zero anything knowledge of how to write at all. I just one day I just
Oh,
started writing, uh, and and I almost wish somebody had told me, hey, your first three books aren't going to sell. They're practice, and you're going to
yeah,
need that practice because you are still, you know, 12 books later, you're still figuring out how to do this.
yeah.
But I think what it also teaches you is it teaches you, and it sounds like this was the case for you, whether or not you even want to do it.
Yes.
Because if you're willing to let two books go and you're like,
Yep.
I've got an idea for another one and I
Mhm.
enjoy doing this, then you're a writer. If you're just like, I just want to write a book and I hate every moment of it and I finally got it done and it never sold and I'm miserable,
Mhm.
it was never meant to be.
Exactly. And I think you're absolutely right. You kind of hit the nail on the head. If you do this sort of thing without any money, without any payment, any promise of anything,
Right.
and you keep doing it, that means that you're meant to do it. But like, what brought you to writing all of a sudden? So you had a similar experience. You came to writing a little bit later, but
Yeah, it
what?
was it was literally I was taking a class one day for a continuing education class for this appraisal license I used to have. And it was
Mhm.
a really boring class. So I decided to give myself a riddle. And I was going to figure out that riddle. It was a little murder mystery riddle that just popped into my head. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm going to spend the last 2 hours of this class figuring out kind of the backstory that explains this riddle. And I couldn't do it. And it
Mhm.
just nagged at me. And so I went home, I started like writing it down, like writing like, well, what would explain this?
Right.
And then in 3 months, I had this 400-page manuscript. And I mean, it was terrible, but like,
Right.
I'm like, this is meaningful. Like, I
Yeah.
should pay attention to what this is because this kind of thing has never happened to me before. And I didn't tell anybody I was doing it because I was embarrassed. And
Mhm.
and then I
Okay.
started reading books about how to write, and then I started writing. And I actually got an agent with that book, but it never sold. And
Mhm.
then out of fear of my agent dropping me, I wrote a second novel, and then it just kind of went from there. But I'm like, I enjoy this and I enjoy learning. I enjoy the rejection to a certain extent because they're showing me a path, and it's fascinating. And so most of it's all been self-taught. I read maybe two books. Stephen King's On Writing was probably the most
Mine too.
meaningful to me.
Mhm.
But after a while, I'm like, okay, I think
Yeah.
I'm getting the hang of this. And it changes over time. Your voice, it takes a while for your voice to even be identified. And then once it is, even that still shifts over time. So your first two books you did, they didn't go anywhere, it sounds like.
Probably the first three didn't go
First
anywhere.
three.
Yeah. It was the fourth one that I wrote that I knew that I was onto something. And that's why I set it aside because I knew that I had to do, what you just said. I had to go back and actually learn. So I, got some more books, of course. Read some books. Stephen King's was one of them on how to write, how to go about doing these things. Because I was at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm serious about this. I'm three books in. It's time to learn what it is that I'm doing. So did that. I actually went to a writing workshop,
Mm.
Viable Paradise. I went to that as well. Outstanding experience just to have a week with published professional writers, not only that week to write, but to learn from them, to have them actually critique your work. That was just invaluable. and also encouraging, right? Because I went there thinking if they tell me I'm crap, this could, it wouldn't, you know what I mean? I was going to say it may have stopped me from writing, probably would not. But just to even have someone encourage me and say, no, this isn't total crap. You've got something here. That meant a whole
It's
lot.
not total crap.
Right. It's just only partially crap, right? Partial. But that was, just taking that time to come back and learn to, again, go to that workshop and then just come back to that other book and say, okay, let me take another stab at it.
And you probably looked at that other book and however much you had already written and probably had a very different opinion on it, even just with a week's long workshop. Did you ever, form or join a critique group during this time?
I did. There were actually a couple folks that I worked with out of that workshop. So we did critique each other's work for a time. And then, as what happens with a lot of critique groups, we all kind of went off in different directions.
Yep.
Some people decided not to write anymore. And then, things just changed. And it wasn't a bad breakup or anything. It was just sort of a fade away.
Yeah.
So I was on my own for quite a bit. And I'm in another work critique group now. But for a large part of my career in there, it was just kind of me and also my husband, who's just an excellent reader because he just does not mind telling me if something like totally sucks.
Yeah.
And he's also a screenwriter. So just having that.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, having that person there to help was just invaluable.
And but there's such a vulnerability in that, right? Like there's such a vulnerability with showing anybody your work. And I think that's one of the things that stops a lot of writers is they're too scared to do that. So I'm like, well, you're never going to go anywhere then if that's the case. But there's something particularly hard when it's somebody, a significant other.
Oh yeah.
And you're like my partner, she's the first person who sees my critique group sees a few chapters probably as I'm writing the book, but then my partner is the first to see the full thing because she edits for me and then I send it off to my agent. But it's a very scary to this day, like it's very like nerve-wracking. And you're like, what if they hate it? What if just tell me the truth.
You never get over that feeling, right?
You never get over that feeling, and you probably shouldn't ever get over that feeling. I mean, there's things, sometimes you'll write something like, I know this is good. It might, I don't know if it's great, but I know it's good. And, you hope to develop that confidence along the way, because the other issue is like when you're in a critique group, you get 8 different opinions.
Yeah.
And you have to have the confidence to know whose opinion to, because you can't listen to all 8 because they're all saying probably different things.
Exactly. And you'll end up with, and I did that, early on in my career when I didn't know any better. I was in the group and I thought, okay, you got to take everyone's opinion and you got to somehow incorporate this. And then you just kind of end up with a mess. Right. But going back to what you just said about developing that confidence, that's the important piece. You have to get to the point where you're comfortable with what you can do and what you know and what you don't know. And then you're also comfortable with the people that you've carefully curated to read your work. Because you might have one person in your group that's really, really good at, fight scenes.
Right.
But, he's not going to be able to give you a whole lot when it comes to the emotional impact of this, denouement.
Right.
But you might have another person that's really, really good at dialogue, or a person that's great at recognizing plot holes. So you get to the point where you are comfortable with knowing not only what you can produce, but also with the people that you work with, what their strengths are and how to use those to help make your work better.
And then it just goes up the ladder, right? Because then it goes to your agent who gives you feedback and you're like, well, this person clearly knows what they're doing because they're an agent and their feedback is almost always great. Yeah. And then it goes to your editor whose kind of reputation is on the line. So they're doing nothing but giving you their best advice, which you're like, boy, nobody else had even said X, Y, or Z. And then you get a review that says this book's not great. You're like, but so many smart people gave me such great advice.
That's the thing that I don't think readers quite understand. And sitting on the other side of the fence now, it's just funny. You have no idea how, by the time that a book gets to be published, how many people have taken a look at it.
Right.
So you've got your first readers, whoever's your first reader, then you got your beta readers, like you said, then the agent, then your developmental editor, your acquisitions editor, your agent, your proofreader, there's so many people that have eyes on this piece of work before it comes out. And then you look up and you got a 1-star rating that says it's all trash. Oh my goodness.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and just learning like how to listen to all those people and to edit. So last year I spent probably 9 months in editing which I've never ever spent that much time editing a book before. So it's actually causing a 2-year gap between releases because of that. But I'm like, if I'm going to, all these people were giving me really fantastic advice that was basically gutting this book twice. So, but yeah. And then, and then it'll come out and people are like, oh, it was great. I read it in a couple days at the beach. I'm like, I cried at the end of that book. Don't tell me it was just a throwaway moment.
Oh, man. 3 years later, 5 years later.
Oh, well, that's it too. Like nobody has any idea how long it takes for a book to come out because they might have an idea how long it takes to write it. But even when it's getting it sold, all that, but even when it's sold, like, oh, we're scheduling it for next year because of how we schedule our slots. And it could be 18 months from the time you sell it just because of how it works for them.
Yeah, and the challenge with that, particularly like when you write a series, is you have people that have expectations.
Right.
They want this book. Book 1 is done. They're like, okay, where's book 2? And they're like, give me a couple years, but they don't necessarily understand.
Right. Right. I'm not a Netflix series. You can't binge me all at once.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way. If you want a decent piece of work, then it's going to take time. And I think that's one of those things that I most like readers to understand is the amount of time and effort that goes into doing the work. It's not one of those things that you can, even writing, you just can't always flip a switch and have it come out. Some days you sit down at the computer and it's gold. Everything that you're, every word is singing to you. Every word is perfect. But then some days you're like, okay, I've got 2 sentences here and they're both crap. I got to step away and come back the next day. So and I'm not saying that to try to engender some sort of pity on us as authors, but just so that people understand what goes into it, the time, the energy, the work, and the amount of people that are invested in the work by the time it gets to the shelf.
Yeah. And I don't know what it's like for you, but I mean, the other fact, sometimes I'll be on it, like I'll really be in a zone, but the physical act of writing after, even for me, if I'm writing like really writing, like if I write 1,000 words nonstop straight and I'm tired, it's really, it's taxing. And I think that's a muscle you can continue to build. Cause I know some writers who write hours upon hours and I can't wrap my head around that, but I think you can build up to that. But I think that's what a lot of people don't realize too, is like, even if you have all the great ideas, just the act of writing is so mentally taxing that you do start to get fuzzy and sloppy towards the end of it.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't recognize is as well, just the mental aspects of it. But it's similar to what you might feel during the day. Someone might say, okay, you go into your office and you sit at your computer and you have meetings and you do this and that. That can be taxing, but not in the same way for me as doing creative work. You're absolutely right. And it's something that I didn't realize before I started writing. I can be really exhausted at the end of a writing session. And even physically, right? Your wrists, your hands, your shoulders, even.
Yeah.
It's a taxing endeavor.
You know what I think it is? I think it's because, say you're in a day job, a lot of it's kind of rote and, you're not giving a full mental effort because you know how to do it. Right. With writing, you can't shortchange it. You can't half-ass it because it literally doesn't work. You have to be totally on, and being totally on for anything is exhausting. For more, once you hit maybe a 30-minute mark, if you're totally on for something, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And we're not, with where we are in society today, we're not used to being ever on for a long time because we're just constantly being distracted. And here you're just focused and you're creating, and you realize like, God damn it, that's a lot of, it really takes a toll. And because you're just not like that the rest of the day. So
is an hour, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, is an hour generally your limit, or have you stretched that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I used to, I get lazy over time. I used to like take writing vacations alone. I'm going to go to Montreal for a week and I'm going to write
Oh, nice.
2,000 words a day. And I would do that. And it was
Mhm.
great. But I think it was just an excuse to go to Montreal because I think you have 10,000 words done and then you're like, are these the best
Yeah.
10,000 words? What I can, yes, I can go longer than an hour, but I also like when you're on a roll stopping and then you're excited because I
Mhm.
can't wait to pick this up tomorrow because I kind of think I know where this is going and it's
Yeah.
going to be really messed up and it's going to be fantastic,
Yeah.
as opposed to finishing a great scene and then you don't know what comes next and then that's
Yeah.
kind of hard to get up again. But I was just going to ask, so that fourth book that you picked back up, was that the one that did you get an agent with that book?
Yes, I did. Actually
Okay.
got an agent with that. That book was Bacchanal.
Okay. And then that, so what was that? So the agents obviously start shopping it. And what was that process like?
Actually, I did a lot of editing on that book with my agent before we even went out on submission. She's just one of those rare agents that's as good an editor as she is an agent.
Oh,
So
that's
she was
great.
able to actually spend a crap ton of time with me, just polishing the book up and getting it ready to go. And then we went out on sub, and I want to say we sold the book within, I think it was 4 months, maybe 5 months.
Mhm. That's
And
great.
then, yeah, and then kind of just went on a whirlwind of even more edits
Yeah,
with
yeah,
that book.
of course. But I mean, that's a fantastic story. And I think for a lot of listeners who don't necessarily know the business, shopping it and having somebody want to buy it within 4 or 5 months is pretty quick. So
Yeah.
that's, even though everything sounds like a long process, and certainly we all know the stories of the people who write their first book and then it goes to a bidding war in like 3 hours.
Yeah.
That is not the norm.
Like
What
that's
you and I have gone through, that's, building those war scars,
yeah,
that's the norm
that's the
for the writing community. And then you're kind of off to the races, and you saw your novel in hardcover format, or at least in become physically alive. And that must have been a very exciting manifestation for you.
yeah, it's almost, it's completely surreal.
Yeah.
Having gone to libraries and bookstores my entire life, having gone to author events at bookstores and all those sorts of things, and looking at these people with such reverence, and then seeing my book out, like I said, it's totally surreal. But it's just, again, one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. So I wouldn't take it all back. And then after that first one, luckily, and this is why you have to keep writing, I had the second book because the first book was a first deal was rather a 2 book deal, but I had the second book done already. That was the Quarter Storm. So I had that one done. I mean, and when I say done, I mean, second draft type of
Yeah.
done. So I was able to polish that one up and then get that in, and then made the crazy decision to write a series, and that led to the Foreign Exchange.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then did your husband just say, told you you could do this?
Oh, all the time.
Does he
All the
does he
time.
ask for some of the royalties?
He does not, luckily.
That's awesome. I mean, that's great. And now, you know, like me, you are figuring out, or you have figured out, how do I manage two very separate lives that I have?
Yeah,
But you can, because you probably get that. I get that question a lot, and I'm like, you can figure it out. Like,
yeah,
it's if you prioritize your passions, right?
right.
And maybe your day job's not your passion, but supporting your family is a passion.
Mhm.
and and you have all these other different interests, and they all have to fall somewhere in your priority list, and whatever is you're most passionate about has to be at the top. That might
Absolutely.
just be watching TV, but for us it's writing, and it's
Mhm.
it's not that hard to do. So
It is. Yeah, and that's why writing is probably the first. I make it the first thing that I do at the beginning of the day because it's what I'm most passionate about, and I want to give that best part of myself to the thing that I care most about. Not that I
yeah.
don't care about the day job, but it's the thing that I know is going to give me the best start of the day.
Totally. And it's kind of like, and I used to do that as well. And I used to love it because it's almost like, so I usually work out first thing in the end, but now I feel like, I got it over with. So I can check it off my list, but there is kind of an endorphin rush with getting that writing done. It's like, I've had a very meaningful part of my day already. I just didn't sit on the couch, drink coffee, which is kind of what I do now, but so that's awesome. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a real quick storytelling. This is the part where we make up a very short story, and I've got 3 books that I've chosen. I'm going to have you choose one of those books, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and then that's the first sentence of maybe a 2-minute long short story. I'll read that sentence, then you give me the next sentence or two, whatever comes to the top of your head, then then we'll just kind of go back and forth. I have The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. Stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Alan Eskin's The Life We Bury. So pick one of those.
Let's go with the Donna Tartt.
That was a good book. I read a long while ago. So give me, I forgot how long this thing is. Give me a page between 1 and 600.
240.
That's so funny. I had opened it up to 239. All right. So I'm going to quickly scan this and find a sentence that, okay. So I'm going to read this sentence and then or I can go first, whatever you want to do, but I'll read this sentence. She glanced up at him so quickly that for a second, he thought she was going to jump up and kick his ass.
Okay. Read it one more time. Sorry.
She glanced up at him so quickly that for a second, he thought she was going to jump up and kick his ass.
But she didn't. Instead,
she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small knife. It was nothing more than a pocket blade, the kind that has 3 or 4 small blades to it. She unfolded what looked to be the smallest of them all.
And she started to pick beneath her fingernails. There was blood, dried blood beneath her fingernails. And he watched as she picked and as she told him the story of how she got the blood beneath her fingernails.
It took 10 minutes. Hard to believe such a thing could only take 10 minutes to retell. And by the end of it, he was shaken to his very core. And all he could think about was that their lives were forever changed from this second forward.
She didn't mean to do it, but she did what she had to do to protect her family. She had asked kindly for the man to back out of the driveway. I'm going off in the wrong direction. She'd asked kindly for the man to step back, but he continued to crowd her space. And when he went to lay a hand on their son, that's when she acted.
He didn't blame her. For however long they were both going to be alive, he would never blame her. But he knew they had to act. Where's the body? He asked her.
She'd had a tough time of it, but she managed to drag the body into the house and down the steps into the basement. It was there that she got the most of the blood beneath her fingernails. She dragged the body over into the corner and she lay a tarp across it. And then she came upstairs to tell him what she'd done.
Just as he was figuring out what to do next, which of course he couldn't because he had no experience with such a thing, it dawned on him that he hadn't seen their 2 pit bulls for several minutes.
Wow. That's, I love
we can call it there.
I was going to say, we have to end right there. That picture.
I'm like, oh, the dogs are going to get to that thing so fast.
Oh yeah.
That was fun. You see how it started flowing.
It did.
Yeah, that's
that was
always
very cool.
That's always a good exercise. Well, listen, Veronica, congratulations on all your success. I really enjoyed hearing your kind of your publication journey, which is long and hard and fraught as it should be. But it's so great to see it culminate in the success that you had. And who knows how many more books you're going to put out, but it sounds like you're like me. It's like, well, this is just what I do now forever.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Carter. I appreciate it. This was a ton of fun.
Awesome. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So that's it. That is my conversation with Veronica Henry. That was a good one. I really enjoyed talking to her. I like, I like it when somebody's writing journey is a little bit similar to mine, because then there's a lot of commiseration going on in terms of those early years where it's just like, well, I wrote this book. What do you mean nobody wants to buy it? and then learning how to become a writer through the process, and then ultimately finding success because you have gone through all those hardships and rededicated yourself after every rejection. So it's fun to have a guest on like that. So I encourage you to go find out more about her and to buy her books, and you can do all of that through her website, which is veronicahenry.net. And you can do the same for me. If you want to go to carterwilson.com, I would appreciate it. So I have more episodes coming out soon. As always, I'm recording these almost every week or so. Sometimes a little bit less frequently, depending on how much time I have. But you can be rest assured another one will be coming out, I'm sure, next week. So that's it for now. Thank you, as always, dear friends, for watching and or listening. In the meantime, take care.